Welcome to Cold War Conversations, the home of real stories of the Cold War.
My drill sergeant, his thing was, gentlemen, the fear of physical pain is the greatest motivator known to man, and I'm here to motivate.
This is Cold War Conversations. If you're new here, you've come to the right place to listen to first-hand Cold War history accounts. Please follow us in your podcast app so you don't miss a single episode. Doug and Mike served in the US 1st Armored Division in West Germany. They provide vivid accounts of their basic training experiences where they faced the rigours of military life for the first time. As the stories transition to life in Germany, they reflect on the unique challenges and cultural experiences they encountered while stationed overseas. From the friendships forged in the face of adversity to the unforgettable moments during training exercises, with anecdotes that range from the humorous to the poignant, this episode serves as a testament to the resilience and camaraderie that define military life. I'm delighted to welcome Doug Baxson and Mike Hatchett to our Cold War conversation.
I wanted to explore a military career. Didn't know what form or shape it would take, and I wanted to be a combat soldier, not service support soldier, a real combat soldier. And I wanted to get out of the classroom after 12 years of elementary and secondary school as a red-blooded 18-year-old. I think I'll spend the rest of my life in a conventional office environment, but not these years. Oh no. I want to go to Europe. I want to live and work in Europe. I want to see Europe. And as a sheltered evangelical Christian boy, I knew I was sheltered. I wanted to test my faith in the rough and tumble and real world environment that I was quite unaccustomed to.
Great reasons. And how about you, Mike?
I needed a job. So I don't know if I went in 1976, and we were kind of in the middle of a little economic downturn. I had a job. I was working as an assistant truck driver without a license, being paid under the table, no benefits, no nothing. And I said, well, I need to look at doing something else. I come from a military family. My father was in the Army. And I kind of piddled around, and I said, well, I think I'm going to go down here and see what they got. So I ended up joining in July of 1976. I went in on what they called delayed entry. So I joined in 76, but I didn't have to report until October. And the primary reason for that is, given the fact that I was an Army brat, I knew a bit about the military. And one thing I knew was I did not want to show up to basic training in the middle of the summer. No way. Wasn't interested in that. So I opted for the fall, which I knew was going to be nice. I picked my MOS choice was military occupational specialty. That was, I actually, unlike Doug, I wanted to be a tugboat operator. I said, you know what? I think I'm going to go out here and get work as a tugboat operator. Well, the problem was you had to wait. Instead of October, I would have had to wait till January. And I was like, no, I'm not interested in waiting around. So I ended up being a scout because I was a big sucker and fell for the film that they showed me with all the 1911 Delta at that time, riding around on motorcycles. They had dirt bikes. And I was like, oh my gosh. The guy goes, yep, all the scouts going to be on motorcycles. I was like, put me in that. So that's how I ended up being an 11 Delta scout, because I had the idea I was going to ride on a motorcycle, and never happened. Never saw a motorcycle. After that film, I never saw a scout on a motorcycle. So, yeah. And I thought I was going to be a career soldier too. I thought, although it went our own way, both Doug and I ended up being career soldiers, but it was
Yes, we did.
We chose different paths. But we ended up being career soldiers, yeah.
Yeah, we both ended up retiring from the Army Reserve after decades of more service after the active duty stints.
It just goes to show you go into something thinking, yeah, I'll just do a few years, and it gets in the blood, I guess.
Well, and I will tell you one thing. It's one of those weird things that happens in life. These choices that you make that are so odd. So I joined in 1976. I qualified for what they called the Vietnam era GI Bill. And that was like, it ran out in 1976. You did not get it after that. So the fact that I joined in July and the Vietnam era GI Bill ended in the October fiscal year on October. So I actually was able to get an education, which was like the furthest thought from my mind. But that, that really set me on a path later in life. But the fact that I had this educational benefit that I didn't even think about at the time, but I just happened to be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
So, Doug, how does your evangelical education prepare you for basic training?
Well, basic training puts a lot of pressure on the trainees, getting up at 4 a.m. and not being allowed just to walk from place to place. You have to run double time. And welcome to the military environment. So the regimen, I didn't mind so much. But again, I was unused to the fights that broke out in the bay where 40 young men were accommodated under one roof in one big room. A recipe for trouble.
Bathrooms with no stalls.
Yeah, no privacy in the privy.
Yeah. And Mike, how was your basic training?
I will say my basic training, Doug and I both went through what was called OSUT then, one station unit training. So we really stayed with the same unit from basic training through what they called AIT, advanced individual training. So a lot of times people do their like 8 weeks of basic training, they get shipped off to a different post. I was with the same unit, the same group, Delta Troop D5C1 at Fort Knox, Kentucky, from beginning to end. And what was very interesting, I think I mentioned, there was a bit of a recession going on. This was 1976. Saigon fell in 1975, and we've pulled out most of our combat troops, I guess, between 72 and 73. But half of my platoon were Vietnam vets, older guys. So half of the platoon were like newbies, didn't know much, and the other half were combat veterans in a lot of cases. So it made for a really interesting mix, and I really feel like a lot of the young guys, such as myself, I think we really benefited from having those guys in the platoon with us.
Yeah, coincidentally, I was in the same training unit, Delta Troop, the 5th Cav, about 20 months after Mike. I graduated from high school in June 1978 and went to OSUT, one station unit training, in July. And what Mike wanted to avoid, and did so successfully, the basic training in the summer, I was beaten to a pulp physically. I lost about 12 pounds. I was down to about 150 when I graduated. A skeleton, sunken cheekbones. My mother cried when I got back home. I looked gaunt. I was just beaten, a beaten young man, but spirited for having completed the course.
And oddly enough, I gained 20 pounds. So I went in, I weighed 120, and when I graduated, I weighed 140 pounds. So, but I had Thanksgiving dinners and stuff like that, Doug. You didn't have that. You didn't get the Thanksgiving dinner and all that. So 3 names, if you ever, Ian, if anybody ever tells you they went through basic training or any kind of training at Fort Knox, 3 names will come. They should be able to just pop right off to you: misery, agony, and heartbreak. There's 3 super steep hills on a road march route that you have to go up and down on those things, and they are crushing. I mean,
in the heat of summer, crushing is the right word.
Yeah. And you have to remember back in those days, especially, I think it cooled off a little bit by the time Doug got there. But when I was in basic training, there was still a lot of hitting going on. Um, Drill sergeants would kick you and punch you and push you, you know, to motivate. As Doug is well known, our platoon sergeant later on was actually my drill sergeant, CW Wesley Cisco, and his thing was, "Gentlemen, the fear of physical pain is the greatest motivator known to man, and I'm here to motivate."
Brilliant. Brilliant. When you finish your basic training, you're going on to your specialist training. Is that when you're given a particular role, or do you already know what role you're going to be carrying out?
Well, in our case, it was one and the same. We went to basic combat training and then continued with the same unit for the advanced individual training as the armor reconnaissance specialist or cavalry scout. So we stayed with the same trainee unit and the same drill sergeants in the same location. So very different that we didn't change location or schools.
And then when I graduated from OSUT, see, that's what that OSUT stands for, one station unit training, everything together, basic and advanced individual training all together in one location in one unit. And when I got done, I got sent to Sheridan School.
Right. So the vehicles that you're being trained on are the M113. What can you tell me about the M113 armored personnel carrier?
Now you got to remember that thing is it's basically an aluminum rectangle, you know? Its defensive armor is pretty minimal, but it's a workhorse. You can do lots and lots of things with it. It's a sort of a foundation or a platform that you can mount lots of other things on. And it's always been very, very reliable.
Very reliable, easy maintenance.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw our brother in the tankers laboring in the motor pool. And when a tank would throw a tread,
Oh my God.
it was a disaster to get it back on again. When an M113 would throw a tread, Mike would say, "We can manhandle it back into place and put the pin in ourselves." Or we could even short track
Yep.
it. It doesn't have to envelop all of the road wheels. It can still function at almost 100% being short track. So maintenance was easy, and that made life bearable
And it was
in
And
garrison.
then for us, it was very comfortable because, like, for the infantry platoons, they would put a whole squad of guys in there, you know? For us, there would be 3 or 4 people, so there was plenty of room to store your stuff. It was is pretty darn comfortable, actually.
We hung plastic matted hammocks in the back of a 113, and we could sleep up off of the cold metal in the winter in a sleeping bag, hanging in a hammock inside the 113. Very comfortable. Where tankers, they can't sleep inside a main battle tank. No way.
Yeah,
But you were also trained on Sheridan, Mike.
I was, yes.
The M551 Sheridan Armored Reconnaissance Airborne Assault Vehicle was a light tank developed by the United States. It was designed to be landed by parachute and swim across rivers.
It was great. I mean, it was like, you kind of felt special, like you were getting to do something extra. Firing the Sheridan was a lot of fun. The rigors of basic training and AIT were kind of loosened a little bit, so we were recognized now as being soldiers, not just trainees. Um, so yeah, it was a special time. We got to, the thing about the Sheridan, it is fun to drive. It has just got a super powerful motor in it. We just flew all over the place with that. And then we went.
Yeah, you're talking about a 15-ton aluminum, very light tank compared to a 50-ton main battle
Right.
tank. So certainly a lot more fun and maneuverable.
Yes. Yeah. And we got to go through all the tank gunnery exercises. We got to fire all the main gun. We fired a missile, a shillelagh missile. So that was a lot. That was the reward. The best crew got to fire the missile. So that was the sort of, the carrot there. Like if you do well on your tank gunnery, the one that does best through the whole thing at the end of the gunnery exercise will be the crew that gets to fire the Shillelagh missile. And we did, and we didn't hit anything. So, which apparently was not unusual. But it was just neat getting to fire it. And it was a totally different experience than firing a conventional round. Because as Doug has mentioned, firing a conventional round in a Sheridan was like being on a rodeo bull. I mean, that thing would just take off. And gunner's eye, that was a real thing. If you didn't keep your eye pressed up against the periscope when you were firing, you were going to come out with a black eye. So, yeah.
Yeah, the 152 millimeter main gun round was so large, you could actually see the round flying downrange with the naked eye. Unbelievable.
Wow. Well, and the Shillelagh, was that wire guided or?
No, it's free flying. It was a free flying.
That explains why they weren't expecting you to hit anything,
Exactly.
I guess. Do you know that you're going to be deployed to Europe, or is that announced to you at a later date?
I picked Germany, and I picked the 1st Armored Division. They gave me a choice, and for some reason, that's what I selected.
And I picked 2nd Armored Division in Fort Hood, Texas, and regretted it as soon as I got there. But fortunately, one brigade, 5,000 soldiers, were going to deploy en masse to a brand new command in northern Germany in a brand new caserne. So I quickly volunteered to leave Fort Hood, Texas, and go to Germany, and that was the right move.
Was that 2nd AD forward, right, Doug? That's what they called that.
2nd AD forward. Would you believe last summer I went back to the site, the caserne, after 45 years? It's now the home of the German Armed Forces Logistics School. And in my best German, said that I was an original member of the U.S. Army contingent that came over. And they let me come in, and I had to ride with an escort for 15 minutes just to get a look around. I got to see it again last summer. A lot of fun.
That's neat.
Wow. Had it changed much, or it was still very familiar to you?
Well, to the naked eye, it changed a lot because at the time the caserne was not quite finished. No trees, mud from the construction everywhere. We had to walk on planks from building to building. And now, after 45 years, tall trees everywhere. Completely disoriented me.
Yeah, I guess, Doug, it's unusual to be deployed that far north because most of the U.S. Army was in the southern area.
That's correct. It was in the former British occupation zone, except for a small enclave in Bremerhaven on the North Sea. And that's how the U.S. Army shipped in all of its materiel. And in the 70s, there was the move by the Jimmy Carter administration to put a brigade there to defend that port and the rail lines going south. And we went there en masse, 5,000 of us.
Wow. And presumably you bumped into a few Brits there as well.
Actually, we did train with British, Dutch, and Belgian forces that had their general defense plan sectors on the intra-German border. And because I was a scout and not a tanker, when it came time for gunnery, I wasn't needed. Only the tankers got to enjoy competing for Top Gun. So I did passage of lines and river crossings in northern Germany across the flat, swampy North German plain. We had to move our armored units across British, Dutch, and Belgian lines at night in the swampy terrain where you park your 13-ton M113 armored personnel carrier at night, and the next morning it has sank 12 inches, 30 centimeters into the ground, just the weight on the swampy ground. So my idyllic notions of Bavaria with rolling hills and beautiful countryside was squashed in Lower Saxony.
And how did you get on with the British? I mean, I get the impression there was quite a lot of rivalry between the different NATO nationalities.
I think all of the forces I mentioned were quite pleased to see us. In Bergen-Hohne, it's a NATO training ground near Hanover. That's where we trained together. And I don't remember much about the contact with the British, well, only the Dutch, which we nicknamed the Hare Bear Bunch. That was a cartoon series in the 1970s, but these Dutch soldiers had hair down to their shoulders, full beards, and a labor union to look out for their welfare. Were they really professional soldiers? Well, they were in a labor union, but I don't know how much I could have relied on them. The British were more proper and spit and polish, I must admit.
Yeah, well, the British were a professional army, whereas the Dutch did conscript. And I remember the Hare Bear Bunch being on TV in my childhood in the UK as well. I always wondered how they would ever get a seal on their gas masks, their NBC kit with all that hair.
Yeah, and that was a lot of hair.
So, Mike, when did you arrive in Germany, and where were you stationed?
I arrived March of 1977 after I was done with Sheridan School. And I ended up in Frankfurt, and then I got sent to the 501st Replacement Unit in Katterbach, Germany. And I never left. I literally did not leave the building, which I was supposed to. I was supposed to go down to Schwabach. That's another one of these things that who knows why these things happen. But I was supposed to go down to Schwabach because they were a cav unit and they were equipped with Sheridans. And I was Sheridan qualified. And it even said in my packet that please bear in mind, I have this additional skill identifier and I should be placed accordingly, which the guys in the 501st looked at that and they said, you know what? 137 Armor is short some scouts. And yeah, you're not leaving the building. So literally, I didn't leave the building. I packed my stuff and went down the hallway, left the building, walked down the street, maybe 50 meters, 100 meters, and reported to the headquarters unit because when I arrived, they were all out at tank gunnery. I arrived in the middle of tank gunnery. So I spent 2 weeks at rear detail, pulling gate guard and doing all that sort of stuff. And then I got shipped off to Grafenwehr.
Where do you two sort of meet up? At what point do you get to know each other?
Well, my time in Norddeutschland was cut short. It was supposed to be 3 years, but I was accepted to the West Point Preparatory School, a 10-month course to improve verbal and mathematics skill and compete for a position as a cadet at West Point to become an Army officer. I lasted halfway through. The quantitative portion was too much for me, so I resigned. And the TAC officer said, well, you're going to be likely shipped back to Germany. You might want to reconsider and try harder. And I said, there's no way I can do this for 4.5 more years. It's just too difficult for me, and I'll be the first to admit it. So send me back to Germany. So after a brief time in a cavalry unit in 2nd Armored Division, I also arrived at the 501st Replacement Center in Ansbach, Germany, for the 1st Armored Division. But because I had been in the sister squadron, 2nd of the 1st Cavalry, the NCOs told me, you don't want to go to the 1st of the 1st Cavalry in Schwabach, where Mike had been destined to go. They have a dirt motor pool, not even any concrete. You don't want to go there. So when I arrived, I knew I didn't want to go there, so I was a bit desperate because that's where most cavalry scouts end up. Now, Mike, you remember this story. I arrived with shoulder epaulets from the West Point Preparatory School as an enlisted man, looked very distinguished. And the Personnel Services NCO, Sergeant First Class Westmoreland, walks by me, does a double take, does a triple take, look at my name tag and says, Private First Class Batson, you're coming from the West Point Preparatory School. I recognize those crests, and I collect those crests. And I know the only place to get them is in the supply room of the Fort Monmouth, New Jersey Academy there. What can I do to get those crests from you? And I said, you're the PSNCO of the Armor Battalion here? I know they have a scout platoon. Get me in it. I don't want to go to Schwaba. And he says, are you married or single? And I said, single. And he says, you're in. And I tore those crests off my epaulets, and I was in what proved to be a very good squared away unit, which were few during the post-Vietnam hollow army years. It was the right place to land, and that's where I met Mike.
Right. And I was going to ask, I mean, what was morale like in the US Army in those post-Vietnam War period?
Well, I mentioned 137 Armor was a cut above most other units that were dealing with the influx of what was called non-college bound youth. The mental abilities were questionable. The moral qualities were questionable of this all-volunteer force. Mike and I are avid, voracious readers. We didn't find that many amongst our peers. I would say 30% of the U.S. Army were African American Black soldiers, where the general population at the time was 12%, so very disproportionate. A lot of Hispanics, Puerto Ricans, Spanish speakers, also in the U.S. Army, disproportionate compared to the general population. And then white guys like Mike and I from the American South made up the Army, and there were tensions there. We had to go to race relations training, for example. A lot of guys didn't want to be there with their favorite slogan, FTA, you know what, the Army. And that was just foreign thinking to me. So there was a lot of drugs and boozing, not so much in 137 Armor in Ansbach, but in other units. So that's why I was glad to be there with Mike.
We had a really good, solid core of NCOs. And they really held everything together, you know? I look back on those times and there's a lot of sadness when I think about some of the people that I knew and dealt with, and especially when I was a very young soldier and I first got there. We had a guy named Sergeant Coles. He was a staff sergeant. He'd been in the Army like 14 years. And as Doug mentioned, there were a lot of drugs, but among the NCOs, a lot of alcoholism. And Sergeant Cole was, it made me very sad because he was getting chaptered out of the Army with, you know, almost 14 years in. And I don't even think he went to the reserve or the National Guard. He just, you know, he had to pack his bags and leave. And I remember the platoon sergeant at that time, his name was Sergeant First Class Sergeant Vandemeyer, really a good guy. And I remember him talking about Cole and how bad he felt he was having to do this, but he couldn't do anything with him because, you know, Sergeant Cole would he would disappear in the middle of the day, and you didn't know where you'd find him, if you would find him. And, you know, there was a lot of that went on. There was a lot of, the drug of choice was hash. It was kind of a dangerous time for people, people like me and Doug, or other people, I was always sort of a straight edge. I mean, I didn't drink, I didn't do drugs, and when I first got there, it kind of cast me in a light, because everybody was always worried about narcs. Oh, somebody's going to show up and turn us in about smoking dope and all this kind of stuff. We had one horrific incident before Doug got there, where a soldier in the mortar platoon was beaten senseless. I mean, almost beaten to death with a bunk adapter because people thought he was a narc. They thought he was a plant for the MPs. So that was a horrific incident. But I know I'm giving you the worst first. But we persevered through that as a unit. We pulled through that and it got better. Subsequently, got much better.
Much
better. Our battalion, our tank battalion, consistently shot top gun. Our scout platoon was consistently awarded best scout platoon. And most of that we can attribute to a guy that one day I was in the mess hall getting my food, and I hear somebody yell across the mess hall, "Hatchet, is that you?" And I turn around, and who am I looking at? C.W. Cisco, my drill sergeant, who turns up and takes over the scout platoon and is the scout platoon sergeant, and is one of the most professional non-commissioned officers that I ever worked with. Had very exacting standards, enforced those standards, rewarded people, punished people as needed, and just set a thoroughly professional tone through our platoon.
And I would say that was true for the whole battalion, because the battalion was equipped uniquely with the M60A2 main battle tank, with the same main gun and shillelagh missile capability as the Sheridan.
Brilliant. And the M60A2 had sort of not a great reputation. Comments?
But our NCOs made it a winner.
Yeah.
It beat all of the M60A1s at division tank gunnery. And it was the only M60A2 battalion in all of Europe and got top honors. So it humbled all the naysayers.
And by the way, we beat the Brits and the Canadians too, and the Germans.
The Canadian Cup.
Yeah. Yeah, we took the Canadian Cup. I think 3 years that we were there, the A2 took it. So it might not have been the greatest vehicle in the world, but our battalion made it work. We had a fantastic maintenance unit. I mean, that's the other thing people don't realize. Our company maintenance people, they were fantastic.
Yeah, we made it work.
Yeah. And we were the last one. We were last A2 battalion in the Army.
That's right. I showed you the certificate. But there were only 3 battalions in the U.S. Army with the M60A2 and a unique MOS, a 19 Juliet for armored crewmen on that vehicle. So there were only, let's say, 700 or 800 NCOs throughout the Army with that MOS. They all knew each other, they trained together, and they rotated between those 3 battalions for a 20-year career. And that helped instill professionalism and esprit de corps into 137 Armor that was unusual at that time.
And that drill sergeant you mentioned, Mike, he served in Vietnam, had he?
He did, in the 11th ACR.
Wow.
Yeah, I saw that 11th ACR combat patch on his sleeve, and I said, holy Toledo, he was one of those guys in the armored cavalry assault vehicles, the beefed up 113s that were sent to not only find the enemy, but to engage and hold them in place with the 50 cal and 2 M60 machine guns on pintles so they could rotate around.
Yeah, they were mounted on the hull. Yep.
There was a lot of firepower.
ACAV. Yep. So, yeah.
I think, Doug, you sent something through to me where there was a motto with the CAV: find the bastards and then pile on.
Yeah, that was the case in the Vietnam era, which became the doctrine that influenced the Army in the post-Vietnam years that Mike and I were in. Because usually scouts want to be stealthy, go find the enemy and report back on their strength and intentions. But during the Vietnam era, as I mentioned, it was find them, hold them in place, and keep them pinned down, pile on until the maneuver units get there to finish them off, which included air assets. So for that reason, in cavalry units, the Sheridans were replaced by M60 main battle tanks. That's hardly stealthy. And then even for the scouts, we were equipped with the new improved tow vehicle to improve our lethality and survivability. So the mission changed from armored reconnaissance to armored firepower. And that's a debate that still goes on today with the M2 Bradley, which is really an infantry fighting vehicle. A modified version is used for the scouts, the M3 cavalry fighting vehicle, but its silhouette is so high and it's big and bulky, it's hardly prototypical for a scout vehicle. Stealthy it is not.
Although it seems like the Ukrainians seem to like it a lot.
Yeah, probably because of its firepower and survivability.
Yeah, it appears to be better than the BMPs.
Yes, no doubt.
Yeah.
In the 1991 Gulf War, I got to see what that 25 millimeter chain gun could do to a BMP. Made it look like Swiss cheese. Put these huge holes on it with armor-piercing rounds.
Doug, you mentioned the TOW missile. That was an anti-tank wire-guided system.
Yes, absolutely. And we received new, improved 113s that had the TOW missile in a turret that could slew 360 degrees. So we didn't have to expose ourselves shooting the TOW. So it was very advanced for 1980. And I was deemed to be a responsible junior soldier and was made the battery charger. So I had to make sure those TOW batteries were 100% charged all the time. That meant, checking on them physically every 9 or 12 hours and signing on a checklist, fully charged. And that became my job, mundane as it was.
Yeah, I mean, what was a normal week or a normal month like for you?
Well, it was very cyclical, so I have to expand that. Every month seemed to be just like any other month, where at the big picture, you train to fight and you fight to win. At the medium level, you prepare to go to the field. And for us in a armor or cavalry unit, that was either tank gunnery or the RTEP, the Army Training and Evaluation Program. It's maneuvers that are graded by umpires. So when you move from place to place, you are graded on how well you do that. If you have a cavalry task like remove explosives from a bridge so the tanks could cross, you were evaluated on how you could do that. Now, I'm going to tell the story on Mike where that task came up, and it was probably March or April, still very cold. And Mike stripped down butt naked and jumped into the waters to remove the wire from the explosives that were rigged on this bridge. And I remember reading the evaluators' comments that this particular group tackled the task very aggressively, but didn't mention that the squad leader went butt naked to accomplish the mission. And Mike told his driver, make sure that heater is on in the 113, because when I come back, I'm going to be chilled to the bone.
That's a brilliant story. I mean, I've heard of the Purple Heart, but it was probably a purple something else by the time he came out.
Well, the funny thing was I swam down the stream, and they had the evaluators were standing there. They were up there on the bridge. I could hear them, and I was up there, and I took the explosives off, and the guy was looking at his watch, and he goes, "Well, I don't know where they're at, but they're late." And I was under the bridge, and I yelled, "I've been here the whole time." And they just about fell out. They just could not believe that I had gotten there and done it, and they hadn't seen me at all. So that was pretty funny.
Yeah. So to better answer your question, when we were in garrison, we would train on common tasks that are required of all soldiers, be it first aid, law of land warfare. And then we would do MOS specific tasks for being a cavalry scout, map reading, assemble and disassemble your crew serve weapons, the 50 caliber and the M60 light machine gun, and prepare to go to the field. Go to the field for several weeks, be it tank gunnery or an RTEP, come back and recover from the field, get a few days off to catch your breath, and then the cycle starts again.
And then, of course, mixed in there, because we were the combat support company, don't forget that. We were like the stepchild in the battalion. We always had additional duties, things that we had to do. You had to pull gate guard. You had to pull motor pool guard. You were constantly getting selected to do special projects as far as area beautification and building things. And yeah.
Area beautification is a euphemism for picking up cigarette butts.
And banana peels. So, yeah. So there was always, stuff going on. I will make this point. We were talking about the morale in the Army and that sort of thing. I spent 5 years, just about 5 years. I got there in 77, actually more than 5 years. I got there in 77, March 77. I left August of 82, and I went to Fort Hood. And the difference between the Army, the stateside Army, and the Army in Europe, it was night and day. And I wasn't prepared for that. When I showed up, I just ran my platoon the way, I ran my platoon in Germany. And I got called into the first sergeant's office, and he said, "Hatchet, you need to cool it out. This is a stateside Army. It's different." And I said, "Well, first sergeant, I never knew there were two different armies." He said, "Son, if you're around long enough, you're going to find that there's many, many, many different kinds of armies. It's not all just one army." And I was like, "Well, that's not the way I was taught." So, and that's about the time I decided I was not going to stay career. When I got to Fort Hood, I was like, I know I'm leaving.
Yeah, and I left the Army that summer of 1982 as well, because I can see where that kind of career would be. It's cyclical. You just repeat. And 10, 20 years, I understood how the concept worked. That's enough for me. I want to move on. It wasn't challenging after doing it for 2.5 years in 137 Armor. I know how the Army works. It served me well for the subsequent 20 years in the Army Reserve, but that's not something I want to do as a career.
I will tell you as an aside, something that Doug and I, we had approached this independently of one another and found out it was something that we both like to do. I was bound and determined to make the best of myself, regardless of what my situation was. So I was, as Doug has mentioned, I was always a big reader. And while I was in Germany, I discovered the Education Center, and I discovered something called a CLEP test, college level examination program, which you could basically come in, take a test. If you passed it, you got college credit for it. So Doug and I think we were the only ones that I knew of that actively pursued that. I ended up getting 2 years of college credit. And Doug had a mascot called the Big Mickey. that he always took over with him to do his CLEP test.
Yeah, we both ended up earning college, university degrees while we were there with the 1st Armored Division. So I must say, I've come full circle after 45 years where I'm sometimes contracted to create questions for a similar exam in geography for a 250,000 high school students. So I started out there in the Army Education Center at Katterbach as a soldier, and then I ended up working there as a contractor and worked my way through graduate school on evenings and weekends in Germany. So, yeah, it was very pivotal to further our university education independently and studying for college level exam. So, Ian, one of your questions is, what did we do for recreation? That took up a lot of time preparing for university exams, challenge exams.
Were you often out on exercise and actually out in the field training there, or was it generally on training grounds or exercise areas?
Well, we called that going out on the economy. You know, we sometimes we were out on the economy, or sometimes we were in maneuver areas like, Grafenwehr, Wildflicken, Hohenfels. So
That's the beauty of being assigned in Germany. Unlike a military reservation, bleak and bare, like in Fort Hood, being out on the German economy or the countryside. In the winter months, if the ground froze, the battalion staff would approach the German authorities. Can we have unrestricted access to maneuver across agricultural fields and forests? Because when the ground's frozen, the track vehicles won't damage the crops. So it was very spontaneous. If the weather turned cold, we could assume, oh, I bet you we're going to the field next week to have a impromptu RTEP and practice maneuvers. So that was much more enjoyable than stateside, especially being a scout, because you were out away from the main body and can get away with a lot of things. Like going to the bakery at 6 a.m. under the cover of darkness and getting German baked goods and fresh milk for breakfast. And then 3 hours later, our first sergeant would show up with cold rations and say, I had the hardest time finding you, but I brought you your meal. And we would say, thank you, first sergeant. And he would leave in his Jeep and we would throw out that stuff. All right, break out the German baked goods and the lunch meats. And by the way, we haven't had a shower in 4 days. So we're going to go to the guest house and negotiate an off time for each of us to slip in individually and get a hot shower. Where the tankers couldn't do that, and they would be out there for 2 weeks with no shower, and Mike and I might have had 2 or 3. And I tell you what, after a shower, I felt good enough to tackle any task. It didn't matter how dirty I was going to get. I knew I could get a shower soon. Yeah. So that increased my morale.
I think it just shows a genius for improvisation and initiative, to be honest. If the opportunity comes up, you should take it.
But I will tell you, my you're talking about maneuvering on the economy and Doug talking about the wintertime. One time I got seriously hurt was during one of these exercises. We're out there driving around about 2:00 in the morning, and my driver decides he's going to drive through this huge pile of snow. And I've already talked to him about not doing this kind of thing, but he just decided he wanted to try to do it. So he plowed into this huge pile of snow with the 113, and it turned out not to be a pile of snow. It was a pile of sugar beets, frozen sugar beets. And it just locked the track up. I mean, stopped it cold. And I bounced my face off the firing handle of a 50 cal machine gun, broke my nose, got about 7 stitches in my face. And that's when all the neat training came in because everybody was on me doing the first aid stuff, and the medics were able to find me and take me off to the hospital, so everything went well. But never assume that a pile of snow is a pile of snow.
That's a top tip, Mike. Thanks for that.
It was a lot of fun to drive the M113 in the snow.
It is.
Yeah, I've driven a British armored personnel carrier with the levers
Yeah.
for steering, which I found quite a lot of fun. In fact, I got told off for going too fast. But yeah, it took a bit of getting used to, but it was quite fun to drive. One of the things I wanted to ask you was about your interactions with West German civilians. Were they generally keen on you being around, even though you might be chewing up their fields or something like that?
It's a mixed bag. Some people were happy and some people weren't.
Yeah. The older generations who remembered the threat of Soviet Union were always glad to see us. Bavarians, on the whole, were glad to see American forces, more so than in northern Germany.
I did an episode with I think it was a British tanker, and he was trying to set up a firing position in a German village. And this old guy came up to him and said, no, you don't want to position it here. There's a great position around the corner here. And they went round the corner, and it was indeed a great position. And this old guy went on to say, yeah, I knocked out a Sherman here in 1945 from this position.
We ran into some people like that, some older guys that had served in the Wehrmacht, and they would come and talk to us about stuff.
And what would they talk about?
Oh, well, they would say, we kicked your ass, but you won. That's what they would say.
Yeah, they would always say where the materiel was equal, German army was better, but Americans had so much materiel. A Panther tank was better than 10 Shermans, but you always had 11.
Yep. Yeah, they always made sure that they wanted us to know, you won the war, but we kicked your ass. Every time there was a chance, we kicked your ass. And I was like, all right, that's fine. That's fine. You have to respect what they did, fighting for the wrong cause. But a lot of them fought as well as they could and did what they could. And then most of them accommodated themselves to the reality of what their situation was afterwards.
What about children? Did you get bothered much by children wanting candy from you and stuff like that?
Oh, yeah. They showed up all the time. And we always tried to make it a point to have stuff to give to kids.
So you must have been involved in some of the Reforger exercises as well.
Yeah, and I think, did you see the picture I sent you, Doug, of Doug during the end of Reforger?
The one with the 3 brand new ITVs in the snow?
Oh, yeah.
That was index for a Reforger exercise.
Yeah, there were huge Reforgers, which is the acronym Return of Forces to Germany, in 1979, 80, and 82. And nothing stayed in the motor pool. If there were vehicles that were not operable, they were towed out, because we were going to be out there for 3 weeks, and other vehicles will break down, and the ones that were towed would be cannibalized, parts taken out of them to keep the other ones running. So nothing stayed behind, and it was full on. And Mike and I would be posted to an observation post, either mount it in the 113 or dismount it with some kind of a wire communication device. And I remember sitting out in the same place for 2 or 3 days, nothing happening on the flank. And then the next morning I look out and I see hundreds of armored vehicles coming from the stateside unit our direction. We knew we were going to get overrun, so our higher ups, our commanders, said, give as much information as you can on the number, nomenclature of these vehicles. We have to figure out what units they are. You're going to be overrun. Just button up all your hatches and really sacrifice yourselves, but report as much as you can. For example, each scout platoon was equipped with 3 improved tow vehicles. If we would see a formation of 4 or more of these same vehicles, we knew that these were not scouts, but this would be a mechanized infantry anti-tank platoon. And we could identify that as mech infantry in our report. Very significant intelligence reporting.
I will tell you my favorite 137 Reforger story. Somehow we found out, our battalion found out where the 82nd Airborne's landing zone was going to be. They were going to drop in. They were going to do an airborne operation. So we ringed the LZ with tanks, and that night they dropped in. And as they were coming down, the tanks started firing their searchlights like they were weapons at all the downcoming airborne troops, and all the airborne people that were on the ground were getting blinded by these searchlights, and they made us turn them off. But it was pretty hilarious, and it was hilarious seeing the airborne soldiers. The lights would come on, and they would like start dancing in the searchlights, so you could see them dancing around. It was pretty funny. That was one of my favorite Reforger memories because I was like, well, there's an airborne unit that learned a lesson.
Now, you both must have some other anecdotes as well. Just give us a flavour of some of your favourite stories during your service.
Well, I'll have to credit Mike for coming up with creative ways to play pranks on the opposing forces. If you were buddies with the MBC NCO and could get some CS powder, which is like riot control gas in a powder form, Mike would have his guys go place that powder in the dips where the armored or wheel vehicles would come over a rise, and then their wheels would crash into the dip, and that powder would come up in the unprotected faces of unsuspecting opposing forces. And of course, they would have to pull over, and they'd be wiping the tears from their face and cursing and screaming, "Who did this? How can this happen?" And then at night, taking cans of psychedelic spray paint with us on these maneuvers or RTEPs. And at night, when there was minimal security from the opposing forces, sneak in and spray paint their road wheels of their vehicles purple and orange and yellow. And the next morning at dawn, you could hear their commanders chewing out the NCOs and the soldiers. "Who was on guard duty last night? The rest of you, mix some water with this dirt and make some mud and cover this up. We got to move out in 30 minutes. And we would laugh and laugh as we could hear their consternation from afar.
Did they ever guess who'd done it and retaliate?
If they could find us, I mean, the good thing about being
With a mobile scout unit, hit and run.
Yeah, we weren't going to sit there and wait around, Yeah. But I guess one of my favorite memories was, or worse memories was, when we went to Ranger training. Doug just missed this one. I didn't. You were in the back for something, weren't you, Doug? Did you?
Yeah, I wasn't there.
Yeah. So we got sent up to Battalion to go through a 2-week Ranger course. My God, that was miserable. I mean, we had a decent time, but oh my gosh, it was miserable. And the Rangers had us out there, and they put us in something called the dying cockroach. That's when you have to lay on your back and stick your arms and legs up in the air and wiggle them around, and you have to shout out, "I'm a dying cockroach." And 2 of our NCOs refused. They just stood up and they said, "Yeah, I'm not doing that." And that was Bunker. Yeah.
Yeah, he was my squad leader.
Yeah. Ricky Bunker and another guy who was from headquarters stood up, and they gave him the boot out of the camp, but they couldn't do anything about him because that was a prohibited exercise. They were not supposed to do. They used to do it a long time ago, but they outlawed that. So that was fun. And border duty, I always enjoyed our times up at the border. You're really doing a real mission. People didn't bother you much. The food was great. The mess hall was open 24 hours. You could go in, and if you wanted a sandwich, somebody'd whip you up a sandwich, or it was just a lot of fun. Yeah. I would say those are probably the highlights, times on the border, some good tank gunnery exercises that we participated in, and that ranger training. That was all really good.
And that was the Czech-West German border?
Yes, the Czech border, yes. There's always stuff to do. You're always, you're not just waiting, you're going out, you're observing, you're writing reports, you're trying to spot patterns, you're trying to make sure your team is ready to move. You try to do your own alerts, because they would call alerts just to check your readiness level. So you try to ensure your readiness level is up there by doing your own things. No, it's not. I never found it monotonous at all. Now, again, as I said, it wasn't a regular thing for us. It was something special that we got to go up and do a few times. But there was a lot to learn and see there. And it was beautiful. There were beautiful areas up there on the border. So I never found it monotonous.
I didn't get to participate in ranger training, not that I would have relished it, or the border augmentation. My highlight was, once I was promoted to sergeant, was to work in the battalion staff in the S3, the staff directorate 3 that does training, planning, and operations at the battalion level. So I was the one that was asked, how can we report to brigade and division headquarters what the scout platoon is doing during border augmentation? Since I was a scout, everyone looked to me for the answer. Well, I had to go to the field manual and look at different kinds of reconnaissance, be it route reconnaissance or zone reconnaissance, and anything that was in the manual, I would say, this is what they're doing. And we're going to get credit for this, and we're going to get credit for that. And I could check a lot of boxes there while my former platoon was doing the border augmentation. Made us look real good at division.
Did you have any encounters with the Soviet military liaison missions?
We did a couple times, but you would have people do crazy stuff like, let's block them in, all that kind of stuff. We would just take pictures of them, wave at them, and send them on their way. We were not looking to create some kind of diplomatic incident or anything like that. They had their guys running loose, and we had our guys running loose somewhere. So yeah, we saw them, but we never really actively engaged with them.
Mike, do you remember one time our unit police, the night guard patrol, being attacked by unknown assailants? And it was never proven that it was smell 'em agents trying to get it to the motor pool, but someone knocked our guards over the head and got into our motor pool briefly.
Yeah, I do remember something about that, but I always thought it was
proven.
Yeah. I always thought it was the guys from the MI battalion being jerks, but yeah, I think that was pretty much it. We never really 2 or 3 times passing incidents. Yeah. Sorry, I don't have a better story, Ian.
No. You've given me enough
we were
great
well
stories.
trained on, and we were issued maps of where they could be and where they could not be.
Yeah.
So we knew if we saw one in a restricted area to report it and not engage them and create an international incident, very similar to the 1 kilometer zone along the border. Yeah. Don't create incidents. Don't allow just anyone to go in there. You have to be authorized.
Yeah. From what I understand is if Soviet military liaison mission was not treated well, they would tend to retaliate against either the US, the British, or the French liaison missions in East Germany in some shape or form.
Yeah.
So it'd be reciprocal.
Yeah.
So there was no
Yeah.
no point in doing it.
I will tell you one weird story. I'll tell you one weird story, Ian. One time we got word that some faction of the Bader-Meinhof gang might be moving through our area. And so they put us on a quick reaction thing where if there was any sort of incident that we might have to respond to it. So part of the training that we had to do was getting over the rear fence of the caserne, and that involved using ladders and throwing carpets over the barbed wire and throwing ourselves over the fences to get over to the other side if need be. Yeah.
Wow. Because, Bader-Meinhof were quite active in the late 70s and early 80s.
Yep.
Yeah. My first summer in Bavaria, 1980, those terrorists planted bombs in the trash cans at the Oktoberfest in Munich. And moments later, innocent passerbyers were blown to bits. That was my first year in Bavaria. I've never been to Oktoberfest because of that.
When you look back at your service with First Armoured, are there any other comments you'd like to add?
Well, I would say that, the Army at that time, it gets a bad name in a lot of ways, but there were still a lot of good units there, and there were still a lot of people doing good work. And in the end, we accomplished the mission, which was to deter the Soviets and the Warsaw Pact, and I think we accomplished that.
I had a cascading effect for my career. That 4 years of active duty, most of it with 137 Armor, was very instrumental. The time in the battalion staff allowed me to compete for a position in the reserve with the division staff, the G3, where I was attached with my 24-person reserve unit during Operation Desert Storm. So all that training in West Germany against Warsaw Pact armor formations, we never thought we would perform it once the Berlin Wall came down, but lo and behold, just a year later, we did perform it in the desert against Soviet-made T-72s and BMPs. So that was the highlight of my quarter-century military career. But I also worked as a defense civilian, and my time at division level and at Army Major Command really helped me as a civilian career. So I see just a cascading effect. Working at 137 Armor, I learned the concepts of battalion level operations. Coincidentally, a decade later, I was back with the 1st Armor Division at the division level. And later I worked for U.S. CENTCOM at the geographic command or combatant level. So I got to experience all different levels of warfare, combat support, combat service support, and work at all echelons over 25 years. And I got a good start there in a unlikely place, Ansbach, Germany, that no one's ever heard of, in an unlikely time, the hollow post-Vietnam Army. But it served me in good stead for 25 years.
Yeah, I would have to say it definitely established the professional foundation for me militarily. I never found a unit as good as 137, and if I applied the standards that I learned there to whatever unit I was at, it was always head and shoulders above what they were doing at the time. So I always appreciated my time at 137. And I'm going to the reunion. We're having a reunion in Gettysburg this October. And Doug and I have gone to one of those reunions. I wish he was going with me to this one, but I'm going to this one in October, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, no, it's been great speaking with you both. It's given me some real insight into that, that, as you said, Mike, that post-Vietnam War period and, the challenges there, but also what the Army sort of gave to you as a sort of leg up into civilian life in terms of education and experience as
Absolutely.
well. And also, you both continued in the reserves, or was it just you, Doug?
Oh, no, I stayed in. Yeah, I did 33
Mike, you were in for 33 years.
years. Yep. I deployed to Iraq when I was 50 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. I went with the 1st Cavalry Division. Yeah.
Your alma mater.
Alma mater. And they were much better this time than they were last time, believe you me. Yes.
Yeah, I felt the same way about 1st Armored Division 1991 compared to 1981.
Right.
That turned out to be the largest tank battle in American history, and I was a part of that, listening to the colonels and generals on both the ops and the command net make decisions. It was something to be part of, I'll tell you.
Wow.
Yeah, I went in
Well, I mean,
I went in 1976 and I got out in 2009.
Wow. That's some service there. I mean, you must have never dreamed when you were in Germany that you'd be in places like Iraq.
Oh, no, and I've been to Egypt and all kinds of other no, and I was, like, that close to getting out, but some guy, National Guard recruiter, talked me into staying in, and they again, one of those small things that happens, and, I stayed in, and I've, always been glad I did.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the 20 years in the reserve. That's where I got the education opportunities. I didn't have the GI Bill like Mike did, but I went to Defense Mapping School in Virginia and Defense Language Institute in California to learn Turkish, which also served me well in my defense civilian career.
The episode extras, such as videos, photos, and other content, are available via a link in the episode information. The podcast wouldn't exist without the generous efforts of our financial supporters, and I'd like to thank one and all of them for keeping the podcast on the road. The Cold War conversation continues in our Facebook discussion group. Just search for Cold War Conversations in Facebook. Thanks very much for listening, and look forward to seeing you next week.